The front door didn't just open, it exploded inward like a battering ram had hit it. My coffee cup hit the counter, shattering, as three men in HOA security uniforms stormed straight into my kitchen. Freeze. One of them barked like I was some dangerous criminal. My chest tightened. This was my house. My lake cabin. The one I'd poured my life savings into. And here I was, standing in the middle of my own kitchen with a power drill in hand, accused of trespassing on my own property. I was still shaking, holding up my deed like it was a shield. When she appeared, Lavra Allen, she swept in behind them like a queen entering her throne room, clipboard in hand, her eyes cold enough to make my skin crawl. In that moment, I didn't see an HOA president. I saw a predator. And God help me, I had no idea what she was about to do to me. But let me back up. Because to understand how terrifying that morning was, you need to know why this cabin meant everything to me. My name is Adam Stone, and this lakeside cabin had been my dream for 2 long years. After grinding away as an IT consultant, saving every dime I could, I finally bought my slice of paradise for $180,000. This wasn't just property, it was a promise. My late father had always dreamed of a quiet retreat, a place where family could gather far away from the chaos of city life. He never got to see it, but every time I walked those creaky wooden floors, I swear I could feel him there with me. Sure, the place needed work. The kitchen cabinets looked like they'd been dragged straight out of the 70s. The wiring was ancient. Probably illegal. The floors were scratched and tired. But that was the beauty of it. This cabin was going to be my project. Every nail, every board, every repair would be a tribute to my dad's dream. That Saturday morning felt perfect. Coffee brewing in the old percolator. Classic rock humming from my phone. Sunlight spilling through warped window frames while I mounted new upper cabinets. The smell of sawdust and lake air mixing like therapy for my soul. I was lost in the rhythm of the work, measuring twice, cutting once, Dad's old rule echoing in my head. When the world exploded, the door slammed off its hinges. 2 men stormed in like they were raiding a drug den. Step away from the property. One shouted. The other, later I'd learn his name was Tyler, jabbed a finger at my tools. Unauthorized modifications. You're in violation of community standards. I stared at them, dumbfounded, still clutching my drill. What the hell are you talking about? This is my house. But they weren't listening. To them, I wasn't a homeowner. I was a criminal. And then Laura arrived. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She strutted in like she owned the place, business suit crisp, clipboard snapping open. Perfectly styled gray hair, cold smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Stone," she said flatly, like she was reading a death sentence. "You are in serious violation of community standards. All work being done here is unauthorized and hazardous to neighboring properties." She walked through my cabin like an inspector with absolute power, touching my tools, scribbling notes, opening cabinets I just hung, all while the security goons boxed up my equipment like it was contraband. When I shoved my deed into her hands, she barely glanced at it. "Individual property deeds," she said dismissively, "do not supersede community authority when safety is at stake." My jaw dropped. Safety? I was hanging cabinets, not building a bomb. And then it happened. Laura's facade cracked. Just for a second. She tugged at the basement door handle. It was locked. And in her eyes, I didn't see control. I saw panic. "I'll need immediate access to the basement for foundation compliance verification," she snapped, voice sharp with something that sounded less like authority and more like desperation. 20 minutes later, I was standing on my own front porch, staring at a shiny new padlock Laura had personally fastened to my door. She handed me a violation notice stamped with official-sounding jargon and announced, You have 24 hours to pay $4,000 in fees, or property seizure proceedings will begin immediately. $4,000 for installing kitchen cabinets. Wasn't laughing. I was locked out of my own dream. That night, I sat in a cheap roadside motel that reeked of disinfectant, staring at Laura's paperwork. Tyler and his partner had confiscated my tools. My cabin, my father's dream, was now under her control. And for what? Why had she been so desperate to get into the basement? That question wouldn't leave me. It gnawed at me while I lay in that hard motel bed, heart pounding, trying to understand how my dream retreat had turned into a nightmare. The next morning, I called my real estate agent, Sarah Williams. If anyone knew how to untangle this HOA mess, it was her. She'd sold lakefront homes for 20 years. When she walked into my motel room, the look on her face told me everything. "Adam," she said, spreading files across the tiny table, "this is not normal." When Sarah told me the truth, flat, clinical, like she was reading from a title search, something in my chest unclenched for the first time since Laura locked me out. "Your lot has never been under HOA jurisdiction," she said. 4 words that felt like a lifeline, and 100 new questions. If there was no legitimate HOA, what the hell was Laura's angle? A delusional vigilante? Or something darker and carefully planned? We started digging. I looked up the address on the violation notice, expecting a stately lakefront mansion, proof of some self-appointed queen's claim to authority. Instead, I found Sunset Gardens Apartments, peeling paint, sagging steps, a cluster of rental units 3 miles from the lake. When Lavra emerged from Building B in a beat-up Civic, the illusion shattered. She was not lakefront royalty. She was renting Sarah Dove into business registries while I pretended I wasn't tailing a woman who'd just stolen my life. Harmony Lake Security? It doesn't exist, she reported over lunch. No license. No insurance. No filings. The uniforms? A Halloween costume with a logo. The radio static? Theater, not training. But the fraud wasn't slapdash. It was a machine. Walking door to door that afternoon, a pattern emerged like a map of small, deliberate wounds. Mrs. Carter paid $200 for a water test that never happened. George forked over $150 for a property assessment that was 10 minutes of Lavra pacing a lawn. The young couple down the road quietly admitted they'd given $300 to a community safety fund that bought them zero protection, only shamed out by evening I could total the theft. More than $3,000 in my neighborhood alone. This wasn't desperation. It was a system built to look official and pounce on trust. I went to a property lawyer hoping for a fast answer and came away with a timeline of misery. Document everything, don't confront them directly, and brace for a long, expensive fight. Fraud like this preys on the polite, and the courts aren't quick to believe the person with the deed who looks like a troublemaker. Back at the cabin, well, outside it, since Laura still had the lock, Tyler, the security guy, did his patrol like a man on a loop. He photographed everything, made hushed calls, and his shoulders looked smaller each day. He wasn't a zealot. He looked like someone who'd been pushed into a role he didn't sign up for. Late that night, parked opposite Sunset Gardens with nothing but coffee and adrenaline, I watched Laura pace her front stoop, phone pressed to her ear. She was frantic. "I need more time. The transfer documents are almost ready." I heard her hiss into the receiver before she spotted my car and clipped the call short. Transfer to whom? The next morning, hungry for answers, I followed her. Call it obsession, call it reckless. I needed to know who was behind the paperwork that threatened to steal my dream. She drove to Murphy's Cafe downtown, a place where people meet to make deals, to sign things, to close chapters. I parked 2 blocks away and sipped cold coffee as she walked in. I had a front row seat to whatever meeting was about to pull the curtain back on. Laura's operation. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew. And suddenly this wasn't just about a fake HOA. It was about a deliberately built racket with real muscle behind it. He looked like a kid who'd been pulled out of a nightmare and told to explain it to strangers. Trembling, eyes darting, Tyler's whole body screamed, "I'm sorry," but there was steel underneath that terror, a determined, terrified kind of courage. "I can't stay long," he hissed, voice barely audible as he fumbled for his phone. "You need to hear this." What he handed me changed everything. His phone was a filing cabinet of crimes, dozens of audio clips, each labeled with a date and time. 3 weeks of Laura's voice, unfiltered, every manipulation, every threat, every instruction caught in her own words. "I've been recording everything," Tyler admitted. "She threatened my mom if I didn't help. I kept these in case it blew up." Guess it finally did. Listening to the tapes felt like stepping behind the curtain of a confidence scheme. Lavra, calm and clinical, mapped out the whole racket, how she'd pick targets, how she'd forge transfers, who was pressuring her for cash, loan shark creditors she named by contemptuous nickname, and the blunt threats she used to keep her crew in line. She talked about pushing homeowners until they surrendered, about manufacturing safety crises to justify seizing property. Tyler's voice cracked when he told me he'd thought it was legitimate at first, until the talk turned to eviction, timelines, and selling cabins to pay debts. Tyler hadn't trusted her. He'd been gathering proof in secret, recordings made between forced shifts, hidden in his pocket like a small, dangerous hope. When he took them to county fraud investigators, the change in the room was immediate. They'd been hunting this pattern for months. They didn't have a name. They had a method. Tyler's tapes tied that method to a human voice. Armed with those files, MY attorney rushed an emergency motion to vacate Laura's bogus restraining order. In court the next morning, the judge listened, read the transcripts, watched the evidence, and tossed the case. Frivolous and malicious, the judge declared, meaning Laura couldn't use this trick again. For the first time in weeks, I felt the choke around my throat loosen. Coming home felt like reclaiming a body that had been searched and ransacked. Lavra had been thorough. Drawers rifled, furniture rearranged, the basement lock chewed to pieces by repeated attempts. Whoever she was looking for down there wasn't looking for trinkets. She wanted something specific, and she'd risked felony breaking and entering to find it. I convened the neighborhood that night and put the whole operation on the table. Mrs. Carter, pale and ashamed, admitted the $200 water test never happened. George confessed his phantom assessment. The young couple confessed to bleeding hundreds into a safety fund that never bought a single patrol. Fraud stitched together across the block. Once the victims compared notes, the pattern snapped into place. Lavra had been banking on our instinct to trust official-looking paperwork. She had preyed on it like a predator, knowing exactly where to bite. Predictably, she fought back with theater. Fake cease and desist letters from non-existent firms, bluffing to intimidate. But the more she lashed out, the more she exposed herself. When she threatened Tyler's family, she crossed a legal red line. Witness intimidation. That single desperate visit to his mother's house triggered federal exposure, and the investigators moved like a cord tightened. I watched her pack from across the street, clutching boxes and trying to run. That beat-up Honda looked pathetic against months of criminal paperwork. Where could she go? The net was already knitted across counties. Federal partners were talking. The exits were closing. That first night back in my cabin, I changed every lock, took inventory of the damage, and slept with the lights on, not because I still feared being alone, but because I finally believed I wasn't. The county's lead investigator called that evening. They were ready to arrest. But they needed the full picture. They suspected this cabin scam was only the tip of something much larger. What arrived next would make my head spin. Evidence that pulled Lavra from a one-woman con into a sprawling, sophisticated fraud network. And suddenly my little lakeside nightmare had national implications. This wasn't some amateur scam, the lead investigator told me grimly over coffee at a downtown diner. She didn't just stumble into property fraud, she studied it. Lavra researched obscure boundary disputes, legal loopholes no ordinary person would ever think to question. She came prepared. For the first time, my nightmare began to make sense in the context of something much bigger. Investigators had dug up historical records tied to my cabin and uncovered what fueled Laura's obsession with my basement and why she'd spoken so confidently about boundary issues. Back in 1962, a surveyor had made a 2-foot error while mapping the lakefront properties. A sliver of land from my cabin technically overlapped the neighboring lot. At the time, nobody bothered to fix it. It was too small to matter. But Lavra had seized on that ancient mistake like a predator smelling blood. Her plan was ruthless and calculated. Exploit the surveyor error, sow doubt about ownership, then claim the disputed area defaulted to community control through obscure legal channels. With my property rights clouded, she could push for a forced resolution, a sale at half market value. The financial trail was equally cold-blooded. Laura's loan shark creditors had set up a shell company ready to buy my cabin for $80,000, less than half its $180,000 value. After phony legal fees and fabricated administrative costs, Lavra would pocket exactly $15,000, just enough to pay off her gambling debts and crawl out from under the thumb of the dangerous people breathing down her neck. Suddenly, her obsession with my basement clicked. Investigators revealed that the original 1962 survey markers were still buried beneath the foundation. Lavra had been desperate to find them during her bogus inspections. If she uncovered those markers, she could pass them off as new evidence, bolstering her fabricated dispute. Twisted? Absolutely. But undeniably clever. That's when federal agents stepped in. "Your case is the linchpin," one FBI agent told me. "We've been tracking nearly identical HOA scams across 3 states. Always lake communities, always properties with messy title histories or elderly owners." Laura's methods fit the pattern perfectly, but until now, we never had real-time evidence of how it worked. Her timeline also came into focus. Subpoenaed financial records showed Lavra wasn't just paying off one $15,000 debt, she was drowning. Maxed credit cards, overdue accounts, bankruptcy looming. Friday was the drop-dead date. Not random at all, it was the day her creditors had promised to escalate beyond threats. If she didn't pay, Tyler's mother and others close to her would become leveraged. No wonder her behavior had turned frantic. Investigators watched her shift money between accounts, sell off her meager assets, forge new surveyor reports with stolen letterhead, and even attempt to bribe local officials. It wasn't strategy anymore. It was panic. Meanwhile, something incredible happened. The community finally rallied. Mrs. Carter organized a neighborhood phone tree to report Lavra sightings. George, who'd been photographing her movements for months, handed investigators a detailed timeline. The young couple down the road researched fraud defense strategies and started warning other victims. After weeks of isolation, I finally had all eyes, and the support felt electric. The bravest of all was Tyler. Despite real danger, he chose to testify against his aunt. Federal agents placed his mother under witness protection, moving her to safety. "I can't let her destroy innocent lives," Tyler said. "Family loyalty ends when you threaten my mom." That evening, federal agents quietly surrounded Laura's apartment, coordinating with local police for a clean arrest. But Laura's paranoia had reached a fever pitch. She spotted the surveillance before they moved in. Instead of surrendering quietly, Laura barricaded herself inside the apartment and spiraled into chaos. She made frantic calls to anyone who might shield her from the consequences she'd spent months outrunning. Tyler and I watched from a safe distance, both horrified and mesmerized by the spectacle of a woman cracking under the weight of her own lies. Negotiators tried to coax her into reason, but she kept hanging up, insisting she would only speak to legitimate authorities who recognized her version of reality. The delusion was complete. In her mind, she wasn't a fraud being cornered. She was a crusader, a martyr, a victim of corruption. As we waited, Tyler filled in the missing pieces. This wasn't her first downfall. She had a long history of shady finances, failed jobs, gambling binges, and fractured family ties. She'd burned bridges everywhere she went. By now, she had no one left to call, just the hollow echo of a persona she could no longer maintain, and a community that was finally seeing her without illusions. The siege stretched into the early hours. Sometimes silence. Sometimes frenzied noises from inside that suggested she was either shredding evidence or begging old associates for help. Tyler's voice broke the tension. My dad always warned me she was trouble. I just wanted to believe she'd finally gotten her life together. Federal agents gave her room to unravel. Hidden mics recorded every word, her rants about conspiracies, her claims of being framed, her insistence that she had protected the neighborhood from collapse. She sounded less like a leader and more like a cult figure in freefall. By dawn, she emerged transformed. Not in surrender, but in theater. She had showered, styled her hair, and dressed herself as if preparing for the most important presentation of her life. Then, astonishingly, she announced an emergency community meeting to clear her name. The agents didn't stop her. Let her bury herself in public, the lead investigator told me. Sometimes the best evidence is the rope people hand themselves. Word spread through the lake community like wildfire. By evening, the tiny meeting hall meant for 30 was overflowing with 50-plus residents, crammed shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with anticipation. Half the crowd still seemed bewildered, clinging to her facade of authority. The other half, hardened by whispers and suspicion, knew the curtain was about to fall. Lavra arrived late, clutching a leather portfolio. But the aura was gone. Her voice trembled. Her eyes darted to the exits. Authority had drained from her posture. She was an actress fumbling her lines. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone more plea than command. "Malicious individuals are spreading lies to undermine legitimate community management and destroy the property values we've all worked to maintain." She gestured toward me, but the performance was brittle. And then it shattered. At the back, the county investigator stood, badge flashing, a thick folder in his hand. "Mrs. Allen," he said evenly, "we have evidence of systematic fraud conducted in this community and others. The truth ends here." The silence was suffocating. Then came the evidence, one by one. Tyler's recordings played over a portable speaker, her voice, unmistakable, describing the fake HOA. Bank records projected her thefts in black and white. Documents tied her to known criminals and fraud across state lines. Each revelation slammed down like a hammer blow. Faces shifted. Whispers spread. Even her staunchest defenders began sinking into their seats. And then it happened. The moment that went viral. Mrs. Carter's grandson caught it on video. The crack in Laura's mask. "You don't understand." She screamed suddenly, her control gone. "I was protecting property values. The boundary issues are real. I was trying to save this community." The shift was jarring. One moment, she was trying to command the room. The next, she was shrieking, her voice jagged and desperate, her gestures wild and unhinged. Her eyes darted, unfocused. Words tumbled out in frantic bursts that made no sense, and around her the crowd changed. No longer intimidated, they leaned back, arms folded, watching her unravel. The documents had spoken, and now her own breakdown confirmed everything. The show was over. The truth finally filled the room. Plainclothes agents posted along the walls stayed calm and watchful, letting the evidence speak louder than badges or guns. Laura's unraveling carried on for several painful minutes as she shrieked accusations of corruption and framed herself as a victim of powerful enemies. "I built this neighborhood's reputation. I protected your investments. You have no idea what you're throwing away," she screamed, her voice cracking. That's when a federal agent stepped forward, badge raised, cuffs in hand. "Laura Allen, you are under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and witness intimidation." Her mask slipped completely. She turned tearfully to the crowd, begging for sympathy. "Please, they'll kill me in prison. I was just trying to pay what I owed. Nobody else was supposed to get hurt, but it was too late." The evidence was overwhelming, the lies exposed. Weeks of intimidation had collapsed into a single, undeniable truth. For the first time, the crowd stiffened against her. A murmur spread, then came applause. Quiet at first, then louder, steadier, as neighbors realized they no longer feared her titles, her papers, or her voice. One by one, they began speaking out. Mrs. Carter revealed Laura had taken over $4,000 for services that never existed. George produced photos of her midnight rounds. A young couple described how she pressured them to fund fake improvements that vanished into her account. As agents dragged her out in cuffs, she twisted violently and screamed a final threat that froze the room. "Those loan sharks know where you live. Adam, this isn't over." The arrest video went viral within hours, 500,000 views in a single day. Across the region, people came forward with similar stories. Investigators uncovered copycats and tied loose ends together into a multi-state web of fraud. Tip lines exploded with calls. What began as neighborhood drama became a regional movement to expose property scams. For me, it was vindication. Local news hailed the arrest as a federal success story, a model of community cooperation and investigative persistence. After weeks of walking on eggshells, I finally exhaled. My cabin was safe. The community, once divided, now stood together. 5 days later, prosecutors filed formal charges: mail fraud for circulating, forged documents through the postal system, wire fraud for using electronic communications to advance her scams, conspiracy for coordinating with criminal partners across state lines, witness intimidation for threatening Tyler's family. These weren't token charges. They carried mandatory minimums, federal time measured not in months but decades. With multiple jurisdictions, countless victims, and ties to known criminals, Laura's sentence could stretch into the maximum ranges. Federal asset seizures gutted her life in days. Accounts frozen. Vehicles seized. Liens filed against future property. When she tried to hide behind bankruptcy protections, prosecutors argued, and the judge agreed, that fraud barred her from escape. Her $15,000 gambling debt kept compounding daily interest, ensuring she would owe dangerous people money long after release. The media shifted from viral spectacle to sober warning. Experts in real estate, law enforcement, and consumer protection explained how to spot fraudulent authority claims, verify documents, and push back against intimidation. Our town became a case study in vigilance. Neighbors started sharing information, questioning demands, and insisting on transparency. For the first time in months, I slept through the night, not because danger had vanished, but because the spell was broken. Laura Allen was no longer untouchable. The law had spoken. The community had moved on, and yet, her final words still echoed in my mind. Those loan sharks know where you live. Was it just the desperate flailing of a woman who had lost everything? Or a final glimpse of a threat still waiting in the shadows? That coup prison life broke Laura in ways no courtroom sentence ever could. Within months of custody, her body and mind began to deteriorate. Panic attacks sent her to the infirmary twice. Hypertension required daily medication. Insomnia hollowed her out. Weight loss left her a shadow of the woman who once strutted into neighborhood meetings with a clipboard and a sneer. Depression sank in so deep that prison doctors grew genuinely concerned. And yet, after watching her try to steal my father's dream cabin just to cover a gambling debt, I couldn't summon much sympathy. Inside, her reputation made her life even worse. Word spread among inmates. She had cooperated with loan sharks and preyed on elderly homeowners. Those choices earned her no respect and even less protection. She ended up in protective custody, 23 hours a day in solitary, a quick shower, a short walk, then back to a concrete box. Worse still, some of her old associates had ties inside the federal system, meaning even isolation couldn't fully shield her. While Lavra crumbled, Tyler rebuilt. Granted immunity and placed under witness protection, he transformed his family's darkest chapter into purpose. He launched a legitimate security consulting firm dedicated to helping families fight property fraud. "I want to keep what happened to you from destroying other families," he told me one evening. And he meant it. His company built training workshops, neighborhood checklists, even a helpline for seniors. Clients began reporting real results. Scams blocked, fraudsters reported faster, and families making calmer, smarter decisions under pressure. Tyler had turned inherited chaos into lasting protection. With Lavra gone, my own life brightened almost overnight. Renovations finally moved ahead, and I enjoyed the peaceful lake retreat I'd once only imagined. Property values surged as word spread about our proactive stand against fraud. Realtors even marketed the neighborhood as the community that beat the scammer. Investigations' ripple effects ran far wider. Laura's case exposed hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraud across lakefront communities. Federal agencies used her playbook against copycat criminals, creating new protocols to spot and stop property scams before they spread. When Lavra was sentenced, it felt like closing the final chapter of a long, exhausting book. Judges rarely show mercy in organized fraud cases, and they didn't here. 12 years in federal prison, parole eligibility after 8. Worse still for her, restitution orders meant every dollar she ever earned after release would go straight back to her victims, plus interest and legal costs. Financial servitude for life. Her crimes would never pay. 6 months later, I hosted a celebration at my completed cabin. 25 families came, sharing food, laughter, and the strange gratitude of having survived the same storm together. Out of the ashes of fear, we built a legitimate homeowners association focused not on control but on cooperation. That night, Tyler stopped by with an update. His firm had already stopped 4 similar scams in nearby towns. "Lavra accidentally showed us every warning sign," he said with a grin. "Now, we use her own playbook against people like her." The irony was perfect. Prosecutors leveraged the case into stronger laws, mandatory disclosures for groups claiming property authority, tougher penalties for impersonation, and new consumer protection modules in real estate training programs. Our story became a template, proof that vigilance and solidarity were stronger than fear. A year later, Lavra sat in her federal cell. No visitors, no letters, no hope of a clean slate. Meanwhile, I sat on my lakeside deck surrounded by neighbors who had become family. The nightmare had given us something rare. Unity. And those loan sharks she once threatened me with? Pure bluff. Investigators had tracked her debts early on. They weren't owed to powerful syndicates, just local operators who wanted nothing to do with federal attention. Her last scare tactic was as hollow as everything else she built. She destroyed her life chasing a $15,000 debt, less than 3 months of a steady salary. And I gained a community, a sanctuary, and a purpose. The cabin even caught the eye of National Home magazine, featured for both its lakeside beauty and the extraordinary story behind it. My memoir, Fighting Back: How I Beat a Property Scammer, became a regional bestseller, giving voice to families who had once felt powerless. Invitations poured in from conferences and consumer protection events, where I shared not just my story but the tools to help others fight back. What began as a nightmare ended as transformation. Laura's fraud broke her, but it forged us. Question haunted me, and it still does. The Lake Harmony Civic Alliance, born out of Laura's arrest, grew into a nationally recognized model of what real community leadership should look like. Instead of predatory control, we focused on genuine progress. Our annual fraud prevention workshops now attract hundreds from across multiple states, eager to learn how to spot scams before they take root. Property values climbed steadily as word spread about our proactive stance and proven defenses. Even Tyler's redemption became a story of inspiration. With a new identity through witness protection, he chose not to hide but to help others. His security consulting firm now serves lake communities in 4 states, specializing in elder fraud defense and scam prevention. He turned his aunt's betrayal into a legacy of protection and education, a powerful transformation of pain into purpose. Laura's bluff collapsed, but our community grew stronger than ever. Her attempts to destabilize us became proof that accountability, solidarity, and awareness can outlast fear. What started as a desperate defense of my own land evolved into statewide and federal reforms. Law enforcement training programs now use our case to teach fraud detection. Consumer protection agencies cite our story in campaigns urging families to verify before trusting official-sounding demands. Real estate practices also changed. Every transaction now requires transparent documentation of obligations, assessments, or restrictions, closing loopholes scammers once exploited. 4 years later, I host an annual memorial honoring my father through a scholarship that supports young property owners facing similar legal challenges. Families gather to share strategies, build networks, and strengthen the shield against fraud. My father's dream of lakeside peace has grown into something larger, a legacy of protection and resilience. What began as my personal fight became a mission that now saves others from devastating loss. Federal prosecutors consult me on property fraud cases, and I've testified before state legislatures pushing for stronger consumer safeguards. Each evening, as I look out from the deck my father envisioned, I'm reminded, home is not just land or money, it's the community that defends it when predators come to take it away. Lavra believed she could gamble away my father's dream. Instead, her crimes forged tools that protect hundreds of families and forced laws that now safeguard future generations. The irony is almost poetic. Her scheme created the very defenses that will outlast her. She remains in federal prison, her life defined by consequences she can never undo. And as for us, we stand stronger, wiser, and united. Because sometimes the best way to honor what matters most is to fight for it, then pass those hard-earned lessons forward. If this story moved you, don't forget, this is Listen HOA Stories. Subscribe now, because together we make sure no one stands alone against schemes like these.